the big one, we're going to start with an MMA story because finally, after months of speculation and reports, the PFL has now acquired Bellator. This comes just days after Bellator 301, which will be the last event under at least the Bellator that we had known. The brand will continue under PFL. It's an all stock deal, so there was no cash swapped in this purchase. But the plan is to continue Bellator under the banner of the Bellator International Champions Series that will see 8 Bellator shows next year, in addition to the PFL's seasonal tournaments and pay-per-views. PFL is going to do 2 pay-per-views next year, and they're planning to do a PFL versus Bellator Champions card, and they're aiming to do that in the first quarter of next year. And they're offering, essentially, there's about 210 Bellator fighters, and obviously they're not going to be able to retain all of them, but they're going to give them the option that you can come, you can join our tournament where you have to fight multiple times a year, or you can do our super fight series, which is just one-off fights. And this was an astounding stat. Like, Bellator we know it's not the UFC, but in terms of the infrastructure, do you know how many full-time employees worked at Bellator?
I'm just trying to gauge by the tone of your voice what the answer could be.
Well, I'm not going to say 300. Okay, that's your clue.
15.
21. 21 people worked at Bellator, and they're all being offered roles in the new PFL, including Scott Coker. We will see if any of them take up Don Davis, who is the chairman of the PFL, up on his offer. But the hope is they are going to be able to get a domestic and international TV rights deal for Bellator. We will see if they can acquire that. And with PFL, they are wrapping up their contract with ESPN. And in about 3 weeks' time, they're going to be announcing a new PFL TV deal, which sounds like it's completed. So it does sound very complex. Like, PFL is trying to do so many different things, from like a challenger series. They're trying to launch like PFL Africa. They want to do pay-per-views. They actually have a pay-per-view this Friday that it's 6 of their tournament finals plus the return of Kayla Harrison. But as we saw, like, the PFL did one pay-per-view last year and it bombed. And I think it's going to be exactly the same this Friday with this pay-per-view. But what they do have in their back pocket for this super fight series is eventually Francis Ngannou fighting for them, and Jake Paul when he makes his MMA debut. So those are, I would say, the names that they have. Not even to say that they're going to be gigantic pay-per-view stars in their own right. As we have seen, it's been extremely difficult for non-UFC MMA companies to draw on pay-per-view. And I guess time will tell. And Don Davis, he was on the MMA Hour today and basically said that we don't know if this is the right way to go with Bellator. We're going to find out. It's very difficult to manage 2 brands, especially when the PFL, yes, it has gained some traction, but I would like, these are still money-losing entities in both of them. And this is going to be a lot more cost that you're taking on with all of these new fighters, more shows. I don't think pay-per-view is going to be this massive revenue generator unless they come across a huge fight that they can promote. I just don't think they're a pay-per-view level company. And we will see. Like, an idea of a PFL versus Bellator card, that sounds attractive, but we've got to remember they're very limited audience that are watching these brands of MMA. It is such a bigger step down, that, or just, I would say, a distance between the industry leader and the number 2 and number 3 MMA companies in the US versus pro wrestling, where I think there's much more of a bridge, even as far away as WWE is revenue-wise. But it's a big business story today, and Paramount will hold on to a small stake in Bellator. So they're not completely divested of Bellator. So those were a bunch of announcements that they had to make today. But this was largely, it was expected, but the talks went all the way back to January, and Davis just classified them as very slow negotiations, and they only closed this deal on Saturday. So that is the PFL Bellator update. So when you tune into the pay-per-view way, you will be all up to date on what's going on with the PFL.
Do you think this is a good decision versus just simply merging and choosing one over the other, or maybe starting fresh?
I mean, I really downplay the like, yes, on the surface, you look at Bellator. Here is a company that's been around for like 14 years, and you would say, wow, there's tons of brand equity in that time frame. Be like, how valuable is Bellator? Like, how synonymous is it with MMA? Like Bellator, I think the value of that brand is greatly overhyped.
But is it
And
more or less in the PFL?
I would say it's similar. I would say neither is a dominant like brand identifier in the overall sports space. Like certainly MMA fans are aware of these. Time will tell. If they can land a domestic rights deal for Bellator, great. But dude, Bellator was doing some like abysmally low numbers on Showtime. And we're talking about, just the crunch on all of these live sports rights. And is a Bellator going to be that attractive when you're talking a fraction of the audience that an AEW commands? I just don't know if there's going to be all that interest. And Paramount found after all of these years with Bellator, like they did not see a viable way to profitability. They're getting out of the MMA business altogether. So like they did not see that kind of value in Bellator nor boxing. So will PFL have the magic wand that can turn this around? It's very different from the UFC purchasing WEC or Strikeforce, where the UFC was already a juggernaut and they were absorbing these companies. PFL has not even established itself yet as profitable. Like they just got a huge injection of capital from Saudi Arabia of $100 million. So that certainly is a big boost, and there could be more where that comes from. The big asset that PFL has, they have done a remarkable job of finding venture capitalists to put money into this thing. They have raised so much money every year. Every one of these 6 tournaments, the winner gets $1 million, and they've been doing this for years, paying out $6 million to these tournament winners every single year. You have several millionaires that have come out of these tournaments, like a Lance Palmer that, I mean, not too many people would know off the top of their head. He won 2 of these tournaments and he's just kind of, coasted off. He's like, I made my money. I can move on here. So they have been able to raise a ton of capital, but they're still in the stages of trying to differentiate themselves. And a big key will be what this next TV deal is, because either it's a renewal with ESPN or it's going elsewhere. And like, I don't know if you're moving upward, if you're leaving an ESPN, but that remains to be seen with whatever the TV deal is and if they're being paid for it as well.